11th, 2013, we marked the first anniversary of a judgment delivered by the Supreme Court in a case called Suresh Kumar Kaushal vs. Nas Foundation, where the Supreme Court recriminalized the lives of LGBT people in this country. When we mark an anniversary, it is a way of marking an occasion of injustice. Sometimes it's a way of marking a date of pillage, of suppression, of violence. And I think, as the famous human rights activist, very well-known human rights activist Bal Gopal said, I think it's surely a more moral way of remembering history than marking it by days of coronations of kings. If you think of December in the history of this country, it's been a particularly bad month. On December 2nd, we marked the 30th anniversary of the fight of the Bhopal victims against the gas leak which claimed thousands of lives. On December 6th, we marked the 22nd anniversary of the destruction of the Babri Masjid. On December 16th, we'll mark the second anniversary of that brutal rape of that very brave girl in Delhi 2 years ago. In this particular context, why do I choose now to bring to your attention what happened on December 11th, 2013? The December 11th, 2013 is an important moment for the LGBT community. And what the LGBT community does is it really recognizes, in some sense, and honors the numerous social struggles which have gone before it. Be the women's movement, be the Dalit movement, be the struggle for economic justice, or the struggle against corporate greed. These are all movements which the LGBT movement has learned from and builds on. And really the point I really want to make today is the LGBT movement learns from these movements and in turn contributes a new meaning to what I think is the most important word in the human lexicon, which could be nyaya in Hindi, nyaya in Kannada, justicia in Spanish, or justice in English. So what is the LGBT community's search for justice is the story I'm going to tell to you today. We take the story back really to individual acts of courage. The law came into force in 1860 with the British criminalizing homosexuality through a provision called Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which criminalized what it called carnal intercourse against the order of nature with any man, woman, or animal, which was punishable with imprisonment ranging from 10 years to life imprisonment. And the story begins really in 1935. I'm going to tell the story through 3 cases. The first case is in 1935, which is the case of a Parsi shopkeeper called Narshirwan. Narshirwan met a customer called Ratan Singh who came to his hotel. The two of them met. They must have connected at some level. Then Narshirwan invited Ratan Singh to come up to his room upstairs. And normally, if somebody invites somebody to go up to a room upstairs, it's not my business, it's not your business, it's not the law's business. But what happened is, Narshirwan and Ratan Singh were extraordinarily unfortunate in the fact that the policeman was peeping through the keyhole. And what the policeman saw is recorded in the judgment. The judge says that Ratan Singh, this is the judge's language, the judge says Ratan Singh was seated on Narshirwan's organ, and Narshirwan had spent himself before the act could be established. It was a failed, perverse, sexual connection. Then the judge goes on to call Ratan Singh, he calls him a despicable specimen of humanity. He says the hind part of the lad has been used to sexual intercourse. And I want you to imagine for a moment what might have been going on with Narshirwan and Ratan Singh inside that room up in that hotel, up in Narshirwan's home. I think you can imagine that there might have been a tie of love and affection between both of them, that they were in some sense conjuring into being a world in a time before time. That in some ways they were establishing a little community of love before the idea was established that two men could be in love with each other and not a crime in this particular country, right? And so I just want you to think of the contrast. There is on one hand the judge who calls what happened between them an act of carnal intercourse against the order of nature. And I'm saying, on the other hand, if you exercise the imagination, you can imagine the fact that there might have been a tie of love and intimacy between these two people, and the fact that this love and intimacy is seen by the law as carnal intercourse against the order of nature. And if you ask me, this is 1935, why I'm making a song and dance about it, the reason I'm making a song and dance about it is because what the judges said in 1935 continued right through independence. If you look at judicial decision after judicial decision, the sense you get is as far as the judges were concerned, The ties of love and affection between members of the same sex was always reduced to the fact or the act of carnal intercourse against the order of nature. And you'd be surprised to note that even after the Indian Constitution came into force in 1950, there's no change in this entire approach of the judiciary. And the second case I want to go to is actually 2nd of July 2009, when the Delhi High Court delivered a marvelous judgment where they decriminalized same-sex acts between adults in private. That sounds like a very bare narration of what is going on. But what I want to say is this particular judgment is actually very, very useful for the way we begin to think about the entire question of sexuality. If you go to any person who's supportive of the entire issue of LGBT rights, one response you're likely to get is, what you do in your bedroom is your business. Frankly, I'll support you. It's fine. What you do in your bedroom is your business. If you look at the logic of this thinking, it goes back in terms of law. If you go back to the question decriminalization, as far as the United Kingdom was concerned, they decriminalized in 1967 based on the report of the Wolfenden Committee report. And the Wolfenden Committee made this point. They said there's an area of private immorality, which is in brief and in crude terms, not the law's business, right? And the point I want to make is the NAS court took several steps forward from here. What the NAS court said is they said sexuality is something which is a part of the human person. It travels with you wherever you go. Gender identity and sexual orientation are not things which can be left behind at home. So in effect, what the judges are telling us is there's a public and expressive quality to the question of sexuality. It's not something you're ashamed of. It's not something you keep in your bedroom. It's something which travels with you wherever you go. It's something which is an integral part of the human personality. And from this, they make another amazing connection. They talk about the right to dignity. And they say when you talk about dignity, your right to dignity includes your right to control decisions made about your intimate life. That is, in simple terms, that is, who I choose to have a relationship with is not the law's business, it's the business of the partners. The partners have a right to choose themselves, it's not the state's business. So they make the point on dignity, which is the other important contribution of this particular judgment. And the third point they make is when they place the language of sexuality within the framework of the Indian Constitution. They reference two great thinkers, two great pioneers as far as this country is concerned. They reference Dr. Ambedkar and they reference Jawaharlal Nehru. They reference Dr. Ambedkar to make the point that you don't deprive an unpopular minority of rights based on majority public opinion. That is, simply put, what controls is the notion of constitutional morality, not public morality. That is, you cannot deprive an unpopular minority of rights just because a majority opinion is against a particular community. Then they reference Jawaharlal Nehru to make the point that inclusiveness is the heart of the Indian Constitution. Why am I making this point? I'm making this point to tell you that the way I see it, I don't think that by recognizing LGBT people's rights, we're doing the LGBT community a favor, right? What we're doing is we're paying homage to the deepest principles of the Indian Constitution, which is inclusivity, which is the heart of the Indian constitutional order. So that's the contribution which this particular judgment made to the very thinking of what LGBT people's rights are, right? That's two remarkable judgments. The third judgment I want to talk about is the one we began with, which is the anniversary which we're marking. It's been described most beautifully, most eloquently by Vikram Seth as a bad day for law and love. Why did Vikram Seth describe this particular judgment as a bad day for law and love? It's a bad day for law for several reasons, for three reasons. Firstly, because it doesn't conform to the basics of what a judgment should be. There's a reasoned decision. I won't bore you with the details of that. But the second reason is it does not understand that the basic principle of the Indian Constitution is that the aim or the responsibility of the judiciary is to protect the rights of unpopular minorities. The judiciary cannot say, let Parliament decide when it comes to the rights of a minority, because we live not in a majoritarian democracy, but in a constitutional democracy. In a constitutional democracy, if you go by majority opinion, parliamentary opinion alone, very, very, very likely, a large number of minorities in this country will not have rights. If the minorities in this country are to have rights, it's very, very important that the judiciary discharge its responsibility. It is this responsibility which the judiciary abdicated on that particular day. The third reason why I think it's a bad day for law is actually linked to something which we think of as sometimes very distant from the idea of law. We think of law as reason, but I think equally important to the idea of law is the question of empathy and the question of compassion. And I'm not saying this is my opinion, because if we go back to the Constituent Assembly debates again, if you look at Jawaharlal Nehru's famous speech, the Tryst of Destiny speech, he ends by a very particularly eloquent remembrance of Mahatma Gandhi. He says, the ambition of the greatest man of this generation was to wipe every tear from every eye. He says that is the high watermark we set ourselves, regardless of whether we succeed or not. So my simple submission is that it is the responsibility of the judiciary to take very seriously the tears and suffering which are before them. And the question you'd ask me is, were there tears and suffering before this particular court? And my submission is, there were tears and suffering aplenty in front of this particular court. I want to narrate to you two affidavits which were placed before this court. One was the testimony of a transgender person from Bangalore called Kokila, who testified to a brutal rape by 7 police officers committed on her in Baipanhalli police station. This was one of the testimonies which was before the judiciary. The second testimony was a testimony by a mother of a gay man, and she testified to the fact that what the law does, it criminalizes my right to enjoy my family life. What it does is it makes it impossible for me to enjoy peaceful family life, because I'm always worried or scared that my son could get arrested and not come back home one day in the evening or one day at night. So in a sense, if you ask me, were there tears and suffering before this particular court, my answer is there were tears and suffering in aplenty in front of this particular court, which was ignored by the judiciary in this particular case. So what I've done so far is tell you about 3 cases, all of which, in a sense, speak about the question of LGBT rights. What is the link to love, if you look at it? In the first case, as far as Narshurwan is concerned, the act of love he might have engaged in with Ratansi is reduced to the act of carnal intercourse against the order of nature. In the second case, the judges understand the fact that love and intimacy form an integral part of your right to human happiness. And in the third case again, what do the judges do? The judges say LGBT people are nothing more than the sexual acts that they perform. They refuse to recognize the fact that there's certain creativity in the way bonds of intimacy are established. They refuse to understand the fact that intimacy is an integral part of your right to be human. And so that's the reason why I would say this particular judgment is a bad day for law and love. That being said, where do we go from here? Why am I here at all? I think the reason I'm here is very simple, because I think that this law has to go. Why do I think this law has to go? Because I think the right to love is a fundamental right every human being has. And if you take it at one higher level abstraction, I don't think one is just talking about the right to love the LGBT community. If you look at the language of the statute, it says carnal intercourse against the order of nature, right? And in the Indian context, what is the order of nature? The order of nature is very clearly, if it is against the heterosexual norm or heterosexual relationship, that we understand. But I think the order of nature in the Indian context also is when relationships are forged across across lines of caste and class and caste as well. So in a sense, if you look at Dalit couples, Dalit intercaste couples, or interreligious couples in this country, who often face death threats from both their family and wider society, then you're talking once again of the right to love. We're talking about the idea of personal autonomy. So in a sense, I think the point to be made is really that we need a much broader awareness and campaign on the entire issue. Again, why do we need to talk about this issue more widely? Because I think in some ways we should also be optimists. We say, okay, fine, we've got a bad judgment. We can't crib and complain about it all the time. We have to see what we can do about it. And what we can do about it is ensure that if this law goes and when this law goes, it'll go in a way that more people know about this law than ever before, right? It's very, very important that it's not a change in the law alone which we're advocating. We're as interested in the fact that Indian society and mindsets change. So really, I think my effort here is to say that the mindset of Indian society should change in the way we view the right to love in its broadest sense. And if you ask me, is this a dream? I think it is a dream. If you ask me the question of the fact that we didn't achieve what we wanted in Suresh Kumar Kaushal, was a dream which is deferred. Yes, it is a dream which is deferred. And I want to end by invoking a black American gay poet called Langston Hughes. He has a marvelous poem in which he says, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Does it run like stinking meat? Or does it explode?" And I think when the powerful idea we have at the core is that we want to give a moral content to the idea of justice, when the powerful idea which we have at the core is the fact that we want to recognize the right to love regardless of lines of gender or caste or class or religion, I think this idea is poised to explode. I'll end with that. Thank you very much.